Welcome to Nightmare Fuel Stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy the stories. Wait 3 seconds, I never should have answered that distress beacon. My name is Captain Alina Vasquez, and I've been running salvage operations in the Kepler sector for 15 years. I've seen derelict ships, abandoned stations, and enough human misery to fill a dozen lifetimes. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what I found aboard the Poseidon's Dream. The beacon started transmitting 3 weeks ago. Standard emergency frequency, automated distress call, coordinates deep in the Sargasso Nebula. What caught my attention wasn't the signal itself. Hell, we get those all the time out here. It was the ship's registry. The Poseidon's Dream had been missing for over 2 centuries. She was a deep space research vessel from the early colonial period, back when humanity was still naive enough to think we were alone in the universe. The ship had vanished during a routine survey mission, one of dozens that simply disappeared into the black without explanation. Most assumed they'd hit asteroids, suffered reactor failures, or fallen victim to any of the 1,000 ways space can kill you. But here she was, broadcasting again after 200 years of silence. My crew thought I was crazy for chasing the signal. Marcus, my engineer, kept muttering about ghost ships and cursed salvage. Sarah, my navigator, ran the probability calculations 3 times, convinced the coordinates were wrong. Even Dmitri, who'd follow me into a black hole if I asked, seemed uneasy about the whole thing. "Captain," he said in that thick Russian accent of his, "maybe some ships are meant to stay lost." Duh, I should have listened to him. The Poseidon's Dream was exactly where the beacon said she'd be, drifting in the nebula's crimson embrace like a corpse in bloody water. She was massive, easily 3 times the size of my salvage ship, the Scavenger. The hull was pitted and scarred, but intact. No obvious signs of damage, no hull breaches, no indication of what had taken her crew. "Life support?" I asked Sarah as we approached. "Minimal, atmosphere's thin but breathable. Gravity's functioning at about 60%. She's running on emergency power, has been for." "Jesus, Alina, the computer says she's been running on emergency power for over a century. That should have been impossible. Emergency power cells don't last that long, not even the military-grade ones they used back then." But the readings didn't lie. We docked at the main airlock. Standard procedure called for full environmental suits, but the atmospheric readings were green across the board. Still, I wasn't taking any chances. We suited up anyway. The airlock cycled with a sound like a dying whale, and we stepped into the bowels of the Poseidon's Dream. The first thing that hit me was the smell. Even through our suit filters, something got through, a mixture of ozone, rust, and something else. Something organic and wrong. The corridors were dimly lit by emergency lighting, casting everything in a sickly red glow that reminded me of the nebula outside. "Creepy as hell," Marcus whispered over the comm. The ship's layout was typical of early colonial vessels, long corridors connecting modular sections, with the bridge at the bow and engineering at the stern. We decided to split up to cover more ground. Marcus and Sarah would check engineering and life support, while Dmitri and I headed for the bridge and crew quarters. That was my second mistake. The first was coming here at all. The crew quarters were on Deck C, a long corridor lined with individual cabins. Each door bore a nameplate and rank designation: Commander Hayes, Lieutenant Chen, Dr. Kowalski. Names from another century, people who'd been dead longer than my grandmother had been alive, but their belongings were still there. Personal effects scattered around the cabins as if the occupants had just stepped out. A half-finished letter on Dr. Kowalski's desk, a chess game in progress in the rec room, meals in the galley, preserved by the cold and vacuum, looking like they'd been abandoned mid-bite. It's like they all just vanished, Dmitri said, his voice barely above a whisper. The bridge was even stranger. All stations were active, displays showing ship status and navigation data. The captain's log was still recording, though the last entry was dated over 200 years ago. I accessed the files, hoping to find some clue about what had happened to the crew. Captain Morrison's final log entry was brief: day 847 of the survey mission. "We've detected something in the nebula, something large. Dr. Reeves thinks it might be artificial in origin. We're moving to investigate." End log. That was it. No follow-up entries, no record of what they'd found, just silence. "Alina," Sarah's voice crackled over the comm. "You need to see this. We're in the cargo bay." Dmitri and I made our way through the ship's winding corridors. The Poseidon's Dream was laid out like an old sailing ship, with multiple decks and compartments designed to maximize space efficiency. The architecture reminded me of the ancient vessels that had once sailed Earth's oceans, hunting whales in the vast blue darkness. The cargo bay was enormous, taking up nearly a quarter of the ship's interior volume. Sarah and Marcus were standing near a series of large containers, their helmet lights illuminating something that made my blood run cold. The containers were full of water. Not just any water, seawater, complete with salt and organic matter. Thousands of gallons of it, contained in transparent aluminum tanks that stretched from floor to ceiling. And floating in that water were things that shouldn't exist. They looked like jellyfish at first glance, translucent and ethereal, pulsing with a faint bioluminescence. But as I got closer, I could see they were far more complex. Tentacles that moved with purpose rather than drifting with the current. Organs that seemed to shift and change configuration. And eyes, dozens of them, clustered around what might have been a central nervous system. What the hell are those? Marcus breathed. Specimens, I said, reading the labels on the tanks. The crew was collecting them. Look at the dates. They were gathered over several months. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that some of the tanks were broken, shattered from the inside with cracks radiating out like spider webs. The water had long since evaporated or frozen, but the creatures were gone. Sarah, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, run a bioscan of the ship, full spectrum. Her fingers danced over her portable scanner, and I watched her face go pale through her helmet visor. Elena, I'm reading organic matter throughout the ship, in the walls, in the air recycling system, in the… oh God, it's everywhere. That's when the lights went out. Emergency power kicked in a moment later, bathing us in that hellish red glow again. But in those few seconds of absolute darkness, I heard something that made my skin crawl. A sound like whale song, but distorted, alien. It seemed to come from the walls themselves, as if the ship was singing. We need to leave, Dmitri said, now. But as we headed for the airlock, we found our path blocked. The corridor walls were moving. What I'd initially taken for standard hull plating was actually something organic, pulsing with the same bioluminescence we'd seen in the tanks. The entire ship was alive. The creatures, Sarah whispered, they didn't just collect them, they brought them aboard and they integrated with the ship somehow. The whale song grew louder, more insistent. I could feel it in my bones, a vibration that seemed to resonate with something deep in my brain. Images flashed through my mind, vast oceans under alien stars, creatures of impossible size and intelligence, a hunger that had waited eons to be fed. The crew, I said, understanding flooding through me like ice water. They didn't disappear, they were absorbed. As if responding to my words, the walls began to change. Faces emerged from the organic matter, human faces, their mouths open in silent screams. I recognized some of them from the crew photos I'd seen. Commander Hayes, her eyes wide with terror. Dr. Kowalski, his features twisted in agony. They were all there, trapped in the living walls, conscious and aware after 2 centuries of torment. The ship lurched suddenly, and I realized we were moving. The Poseidon's dream was changing course, heading deeper into the nebula, toward something that waited in the red darkness. The airlock, Marcus shouted. We have to reach the airlock. We ran through corridors that shifted and writhed around us, the walls reaching out with tentacle-like appendages that tried to grab our suits. The whale song had become a roar now, a sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Behind us, I could hear something massive moving through the ship's bowels, something that made the deck plates groan under its weight. The airlock was just ahead when the floor gave way beneath Sarah. She fell through what had looked like solid decking into a space that pulsed with organic light. Her screams echoed through the comm system as something pulled her deeper into the ship's living depths. Sarah, Marcus started to go after her, but Dmitri grabbed him. She's gone, Be'el Yeri, we have to go now. The 3 of us reached the airlock just as the Poseidon's dream shuddered to a stop. Through the porthole I could see why. We were no longer alone in the nebula. Something vast moved in the red mist, something that dwarfed even our massive host ship. Tentacles the size of skyscrapers writhed through space, and I caught glimpses of eyes like dark planets, ancient and intelligent beyond human comprehension. The parent, I whispered, the ship is bringing us to the parent. The airlock began to cycle, but not because we'd activated it. The Poseidon's dream was opening itself to the void, preparing to disgorge its contents into the waiting embrace of the thing outside. We had maybe 30 seconds before the atmosphere vented, and we were pulled into space. Dmitri was already moving, overriding the airlock controls with an emergency sequence I'd taught him years ago. The inner door slammed shut just as the outer door opened, and we were trapped in the small chamber between the ship and our own vessel. The docking clamps, Marcus said, they're organic. The ship won't let us go. Through the porthole, I could see the Scavenger straining against the living restraints that held it fast. The clamps were pulsing, growing stronger, preparing to crack our ship's hull like an egg. That's when I made the hardest decision of my life. I activated the emergency separation charges, explosive bolts designed to sever the docking connection in case of catastrophic failure. The charges would destroy the airlock and probably kill us in the process, but it might give the Scavenger a chance to escape. Tell them, I said to Dmitri, pressing the detonator into his hands. Tell them about this place. Warn them. The explosion tore through the airlock like the fist of an angry god. I felt my suit rupture, felt the cold of space rushing in to claim me, but somehow, impossibly, I didn't die. Instead, I felt myself being pulled back into the Poseidon's dream, drawn by currents that had nothing to do with physics and everything to do with hunger. The last thing I saw before the ship's embrace closed around me was the Scavenger breaking free, its engines flaring as it fled toward the nebula's edge. Dimitri and Marcus had made it. They would carry the warning back to human space. But I was trapped here, in this living tomb that sailed between dimensions, feeding on the crews of ships unlucky enough to answer its call. I could feel myself changing, my consciousness merging with the ship's collective hunger. The faces in the walls welcomed me with their silent screams, and I understood that this was how it had always been, how it would always be. The Poseidon's dream resumed its course through the red nebula, its distress beacon calling out across the void. Somewhere out there, another salvage crew would hear that signal and think they'd found easy money. They would come just as I had come, drawn by curiosity and greed into the waiting darkness. And I would be here to greet them, my face joining the chorus of the damned that lined these living walls. Because the ship is always hungry and the ocean of space is vast and full of prey. The whale song continues, echoing through dimensions that have no name, calling to its children scattered among the stars. And somewhere in the depths of my fading humanity, I understand the terrible truth. We were never alone in the universe. We were never the hunters. We were always the prey. The beacon keeps broadcasting, patient and eternal, waiting for the next ship to answer its call. And in the red darkness of the Sargasso Nebula, the Poseidon's dream sails on, carrying its cargo of souls toward feeding grounds that exist beyond the boundaries of known space. The hunt never ends, the hunger never dies, and the ocean remembers everything.